Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of OTT.X webinars, where we bring you thought-provoking insights on the latest trends, developments, and news shaping CTV, streaming, media, and entertainment. My name is Jose, and we're delighted to have you here with us today. We're especially excited for today's webinar, which will explore how the infrastructure decisions made behind the scenes can directly affect scalability, operational efficiency, and ultimately the profitability of a streaming business. We have a fantastic group joining us to translate these technical considerations into the business outcomes that matter most. And please don't forget that we also want you to be part of the conversation. So let us know your thoughts in the chat or drop your questions in the Q&A bin. And time permitting, we will get to them at the end of the webinar. To get us started for today, I'm very pleased to turn it over to today's moderator. He's the CEO of the Streaming Video Technology Alliance, Jason Thibault. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jose. Really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and moderate this panel. It is definitely applicable to a lot of the upheaval that's happening in the industry right now is, how do we make technology decisions as it relates to these services that we want to launch and that we are launching? So with that said, like Jose said, I'm Jason Thibault, the CEO of the SVTA. We are the leading industry association for the technical solutions around streaming video. What we're trying to do is help solve those problems of delivering a high quality streaming video experience securely at scale. With that said, what I want to do now is give some introductions for our other panelists. And then once we do that, we will jump into these questions as we've got a bunch to talk about. So let's start off with Harris. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I'm a CTO of More Screens company. It is an OTT end-to-end provider, so all services, everything. And my experience is many years in the same industry. So even before More Screens, we had another company which did live streaming events, starting all the way from Real Media Player, Windows Media Player, and Real Player, if anybody recalls those nowadays. I have done lots of different kinds of projects with streaming. So I have a broad experience in different variations of all of it. So yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great. How about Kyle?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Espinosa. I'm the VP of Global Channels Programming and Data Analytics here at Fremantle. I have a vast amount of experience running content and data infrastructure decisions that help with our businesses as we run a global content distribution arm of today's world. So there's a lot of important things we can touch on where how content and the infrastructure help influence a really great viewer experience that helps at the end of the day influence monetization.
That's great. And last but definitely not least, Rishab.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. Co-founder and CTO at Enview. Been in the industry for over a decade now. Started my journey with building live social media streaming apps back in 2016 when TikTok, as we know of it today, wasn't really TikTok. It was Musically. Back when this is pre-Facebook live era. So I've seen the ecosystem grow dramatically over the years. At Enview, we build OTT apps and we work with customers of all sizes, large conglomerates, independent media houses, and content owners. I would like to thank the organizers, especially at the time when, new content formats like microdrama are picking up, so which brings a lot of interest in people new to the streaming space. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. And I did almost forget somebody, so apologies about that. Lucas, tell us about yourself.
So thank you for remembering me. Appreciate that, Jason. Hi everyone. Yeah. So my name is Lucas, and I had a power streaming vertical here at servers.com. Now, servers.com is essentially an infrastructure as a service platform that specializes in scalable bare metal cloud with data centers scattered all over the world. Now we kind of bridge the gap between traditional on-prem and the hyperscale environment. Now myself, I tend to work with a variety of OTT platforms, broadcasters, streaming platforms, and surrounding streaming technology vendors, essentially sitting more so on that foundational layer. That's me.
Fantastic. It's a really good representation on the panel, right? We've got folks that are from infrastructure like Lucas. We've got folks that are, helping OTT services set up with, sort of a core group of technology. Like, here you go, set your OTT service up. We've got folks that are helping integrate elements and pieces together. As we know, the streaming video technology stack is not a one size fits all. It's not you just pull a bunch of things off the shelf and plug them in and you got a streaming service. There's a lot of decisions that affect that. So I want to start off our discussion with kind of a like a get your attention type of question, because I think we've probably all heard this in the industry before. And it's basically when somebody says to you, I'm getting ready to launch an OTT service and we want it to be the next Netflix. And it's just like, oh, you do. Okay. So let's point this if Rishab, if you can start us off with answering this, but what is the first question you would ask somebody saying something like that to you?
Right. And it's interesting, like, Netflix in its pure sense, brand association, etc. And that's exactly the first, question that comes to us. But we generally, when we start off the discussion, I think it's more about trying to understand what's their business vision for the business, right? It definitely is not Netflix, right, from day zero. So it's more to understand, especially we working with the decision makers. That vision helps us to discuss further what kind of alignment on the technology, on the workflows, etc. that they need, and it's an easier conversation after that, right? So and especially we working with the decision makers helps us to drive that conversation early when they are starting out. And it's not just I want to build my own Netflix. It's also like, hey, I have millions of followers on YouTube. When I launch this, I see thousands of them coming the first day I launch this, and then I'm going to scale it to 1 million within 2 years. That's not the case, right? So that's the kind of conversation I think that we start with, trying to understand how they see this grow, and what kind of content, what kind of brand that they want to build for their customers.
Fantastic. Kyle, Harris, Lucas, thoughts?
I think it really starts with like, what's your P&L? What's like the content that you're offering to the table, and how are you planning on monetizing it? Because you might think you want to build a Netflix, but you have no library available. And I think that's dead in the water from the very beginning, no matter what advanced technology you can bring to the conversation. And then even if you do have a decent category or catalog, how are you monetizing it? That then begets like every other conversation from there. But that's usually how we look at it from our perspective.
Also, I would say that we usually ask about content, even though we are a technology provider and we have almost nothing to do with it, because it is more or less covered by how we approach the project, the technology part, and we can do everything from the small beginning to a big scale up, as a Netflix kind of a project would perform. So we actually ask about the content. Do you have it in order? Do you really have something that your audience is going to be willing to pay for, or whatever the business model is? The conversation actually starts with that in our case as well, always.
So it really does seem like that content is an important part of the conversation. Lucas, what did you want to add there?
I think for us, it's slightly different as we sit on that infrastructure layer. We kind of, having that lens on, whenever we hear someone saying that they do want to launch a platform, I think, there's a few things you should consider from an infrastructure deployment point of view. Do we want to do this in-house, or do we want to rely on service providers, or do we want to just click a button in terms of the service that we've got available in the hyperscaler? So I think that's an important question to consider internally. And if we don't want to do it now, do we want to do it later down the line? As that is ultimately going to affect your margins on how the platform performs and so on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's kind of funny, just from my own background, you spent a lot of years in the CDN space, and you know how many customers came to us and said like, "Hey, we need to provision services." We're like, "Okay, well, what kind of traffic are you thinking?" Like, well, we're going to start off. It's going to be like 5,000 users, but we think by the end of the week we'll probably be at like 6.5 million. Oh, oh, okay, sure. So I think that there are a lot of those experiences that we all have in the industry helping people launch or deliver OTT services where there are these questions we need to ask them about what they're doing because that affects the technology approach that they're going to use, how fast they need to scale. Is it hyperscaler? Is it, on-prem? Is it on cloud? And we'll get to all those in a little bit, but I just want to bring that up that, you guys brought a very good point is that there are questions to ask about technology that are not about technology. And that leads us to kind of our next question. And maybe Kyle, you can start us off with this one. But how should content owners kind of help figure out how to decide between what they're going to do with their content? Is running a fast service the best way, or should they do subscription, or should it be transactional, or should they just license their content to some other people? What are your thoughts on that?
I really love that. That's something we grapple with day to day here. Obviously, there's different types of content for different types of consumers that then they view on different platforms. So if you're a content catalog owner, you knowing where your content is being consumed really helps influence downstream decisions. We had a great conversation prepping for this call last week where microdramas are on the rise, and is that really a TV watching experience versus a phone binge experience? So there's really a innate understanding first about how your viewers are accessing your content that then can trickle down on most decisions. And then it goes back to like the advertising monetization perspective, like how much are you able to secure positions on inventory and programmatic versus how much you can do a sensitivity model on your SBOT, and that then decides like what direction you should be going on, or whether it's fast or SBOT. But yeah, it's a really fascinating question. It goes back to content.
All right, does everybody else chime in?
Yeah, I think I'll go next. So I think as Kyle mentioned, well, because content is at the center of all of this, typically at Enview we have I think a 4-point framework because when you're working with the decision makers, they want this to be like a structured way of looking at things, right? So typically we start off with whether what's your kind of content acquisition? Do you have legal rights to do certain kind of advertising or not within for that particular content? And then what's the kind of content value that you bring? Because when you're going for advertising, the advertisers are gonna ask for, hey, what's the impressions, right? And if the content is high value, it can drive those impressions, then of course you can go ahead with something like a fast where you can also make money. Everyone makes money in that space then. Content availability is another big question, because there could be again goes back to licensing models. In one geography you may have license to stream with advertising, in another you may not, right? And then of course, as Kyle mentioned, the content type, the high intent contents may work really great with transactional video on demand, like micro dramas. They are really great at those micro payments kind of stuff, where you just want to know what's going to happen next and you're willing to pay for it. But then for laid back content like classic dramas, where you're gonna do a binge watch, and you are doing a 7 p.m. streaming session, it could be more of a fast based streaming setup, where you could do a 24 cross 7 channel with EPG and advertising with kind of like an actual broadcast TV experience. So that's the kind of framework that we work with for this particular question.
So thinking about that then too. Oh, so Harris, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to add a small point. I think these models are not mutually exclusive, nor can you apply all of them in a project, in a deployment. Usually, we encounter that who wants to start a service has already some limits in terms of content rights that actually almost already have decided which of these are available to them as a business model. And usually it's not a very difficult question, let's say, unless you want to like explore and then try to get some different kinds of contents and make a complex kind of business model, which is not usual, I would say. Normally it's either subscription or transactional, or if you're a content owner, then it's licensing, or if it is some kind of content that is not really asked for too much, let's say, then it may be fast, that is most attractive, and so on.
No, that makes sense. What about, let me throw this out as a follow-up question. What about the actual content type itself? Like, so VOD versus live. I mean, obviously, a lot of, fast is pseudo live, but it can also include some real live, and then subscription could be live or could be to a content library. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to, making technology decisions?
Well, I think that the type depends on the audiences they are targeting and their habits, or even if you want their age, let's say, because it's prominent in some markets. There is a lots of live, linear, right? In some other markets and other age groups, there is only VOD. So if it is simulated, it's maybe less of an importance, like a simulated live, kind of fast or whatever. But it may depend on, a lot of reasons, a lot of factors. I mean, if you want to do one or the other, you really have to understand what you want to do.
That makes sense. Anybody else's thoughts on that, on the, like live VOD, kind of that approach to the
I
model?
think for live, definitely something that works really well. I think is especially with the one-off events that happen. Transactional is the model that can work really well. Let's say you're streaming one-off sporting event, or doing a bunch of say music concert, etc. So that is the kind of stuff, and of course the kind of streaming really drives the decision of how it should be monetized. Another thing that I think Harris also touched upon is the market itself, because you'll find say let's say American market is more inclined, or maybe better accustomed to subscriptions. Whereas if you're streaming in Africa or in Asia, high density markets, there maybe fast becomes a better option, because people may not be willing to pay for subscriptions. They are paying too much already with all of these different services in the market, right? Maybe that is another way to look at it, where you're making such decision depending on the market that you're targeting.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's turn then from this discussion around models and content, right? Let's turn to the infrastructure itself. And so, Lucas, you can start us off here, right? It's, obviously there are decisions to be made about infrastructure, right? So let's say you're a provider, you're like, I'm going to start this OTT service. You've made a decision about models. You've thought about the market and the audience and the ages, and you've thought about all this stuff. And you're like, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z. We're going to do this. So where then would be infrastructure decisions that might have a real direct impact to revenue?
So I think the two areas that we see the most being impacted is the video pipeline and the CDN itself, right? So anything to do with video pipeline, which is all to do with media processing. And I think first question, we would have to really ask is, do we focus mainly on VOD content or do we do a lot of live content? Because the deployment and architecture setup is very different across the two. As we know, live content is a lot more demanding. You need to process everything on the fly. So that's where we see majority of the cost built up. With VOD content, you prepare it and it sits in your storage buckets or whatever that might be, and off you go, just distribute it across the CDN. But anything live, and if you've got a lot of live, that's where margins start to get impacted. I think the first question to really ask yourselves, how predictable or unpredictable is going to be our viewership going to be like? Um, uh, is it going to be quite event based, or are we going to have some events popping up throughout the year? And I think then establishing some sort of a baseline is where you should probably start looking into, either doing it on prem or doing it in a sort of a more traditional dedicated cloud environment. Well, offload to the hyperscalers, right? Because no, that's the easiest and the fastest way for you to do that. But it does carry a lot of costs associated with it. I think you need to really ask yourselves, like, how much of that process do we want to hold in house, and how much of that process do we want to offload to somewhere else? So I think media pipeline, video pipeline, that is, anything to do with processing and CDN in the end is what's going to really impact your profitability, I'd say.
No, that makes sense. Anybody else's thoughts on this?
I could add something. It is very important to distinguish between the startup phase and the phase of the scaling. When the rollout of, the services for a great number of subscribers happens, and it is very important. This is something that we advise all the time. If you start, you should start with cloud service of whatever you can. Then when it develops into a bigger amount of subscribers or whatever it is, bigger amount of viewers, then only then you should start thinking about on-prem of some kind, or organizing your. Netflix does it, of course, but they didn't have their own CDN in the beginning, for example. I think that makes the point. Just this is like a general rule which is applicable, and I haven't seen any exceptions to it so far. So that's what I wanted to add.
No, that's great. That's great. Kyle or anybody?
Yeah, I think,
Kyle,
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, there's a push and pull between identifying like what you can retain. Obviously, when you build on-prem and do first party or try to build it internally as much as possible, and a lot of it really is about retaining as much data as you can. There's this point where you're paying for a premium to hold data, but if you can't leverage like the usage metrics or the advertising KPIs, then you're kind of like not able to monetize against it, and it becomes a sunk cost. And do you have a runway or path to be able to utilize it? So start paying for all of those infrastructure build outs that you have. So it becomes like that push pull, like that balance of how much can you benefit from internal versus external, or on-prem or external. So I think that was the only thing I was going to add.
Prashad?
I think Harris made a good point on at what stage are you really, that is something that should drive this. The hyperscalers are good to start, easy to start. And I think that is one of the first recommendations that we provide as well, because don't get too much into the technical aspect, and don't put too many moving parts to it. If you have something which works really well for your today's requirements, start with that, and then maybe plan 3 months, 6 months, 1 year ahead, so that you can make gradual and informed decisions over a period of time. And then it's easy to start. Maybe use off the shelf streaming services to just start, but then of course when you start looking at different levers, especially around processing, storage, and delivery, and then eventually you get to a point where you start looking at, okay, how should I optimize my processing. Then you start asking questions, okay, what's going to be a library size, content refresh per month? How much are you going to invest in, doing month on month transcoding? And then what's going to be the kind of, devices that you're going to target that then drives your storage. And then at the end of the day, you're delivering it to the users, and then comes the delivery. But then all of these are questions not at the start, but maybe a tomorrow question, right? The today's question again is get this going and then look at where you are.
No, I think that's really a really important distinction, and I'm glad Harris. Hold on one second. I'm glad you brought up Harris. You brought up this
Yeah.
concept of what stage are you in? Because if you have somebody come and say, "I'm going to build the next Netflix," and they decide, "Well, we'll just throw $100 million at it right now and build Netflix as it is," and then you don't scale, you just wasted a whole lot of money. Making decisions for the stage you're in is critical. So, Harris, what did you want to add?
I forgot a little point. I mean, I did tell you what my advice is to everybody, but they don't do it. I can name 3 examples of different verticals, clients of an OTT solution, who do as they see it fits best their profile or business. Telco operators, they all do all capex, so they want, regardless of if there is a startup, they want it on their premises, they want to invest, they want to spend money, they want to register it in the books. Okay. Then, for example, broadcasters, they usually, all of them of ours, they have a hybrid solution. They do the head end in the house, and then they do in the cloud the platform hosting, the management, platform hosting, the CDN, and everything else is in the cloud. Then we have Netflix like guys who want to do want to become a new Netflix. They do all in the cloud, for example. And there is almost no exception to this. They decide how it works for them, and it depends on the type of the business, I would say.
Well, I think that's important too. And it's, if you're a startup, right, and you want to get to market quickly, probably from a technology decision standpoint, the easiest way to do that is just use cloud services and cloud providers, right? So
Oh, yes.
you don't have to plan data centers, you don't have to put POPs in, you don't have to rack and stack. It's nothing physical, which does make sense. But to your point, and I think all of you have made this point in one way or another, is that that decision is probably going to need to change as you scale because it might not make sense. And that leads us into the next question, which is just perfect. And Kyle, yeah, Harris, maybe you can continue on and just give us this first answer, and then everyone else can chime in because I hope everyone's got an opinion on this. But what are the hidden costs that people underestimate when launching OTT services?
Well, maybe I can start. Well, I think it's the complexity and wanting to do multiple business models at the same time to start with, and not identifying the focus and the main business model and the main objective, which many times should be, to come out to the market as soon as possible, to have the least costs bound to coming out to market, to begin with, to get the first feedback, the first taste of the market, let's say. So I would say people, I mean, it's easy to overcomplicate and to want to do too many things at the same time. I would say it can pay off very easily to focus and to define well what your goal is. In the simplest terms, I mean that.
Yeah, I think
that's it.
what people overestimate when they first launch services and products is the playout costs. Like they're not really quite attuned to all the operational costs that are involved in even standing up your service, and they just assume like you pay for your service and it doesn't scale. In the really grand event that you do achieve some scale and your expectations for costs don't go up with it as well, because obviously the more people accessing your player and your video streams, you're going to rack up a bill too. And I think it goes back to having a phased approach on how you can exploit your content and monetize it. Because if you only have one business model and it scales and then your rights sets get revoked, and I think to Harris's point about overcomplicating it, there needs to be also a fine line where you can have different multimodal monetization aspects so you can amortize your costs via different buckets. Like if you have not just fast, but you have like an AVOD or a TVOD or an SVOD accompaniment because you might have the right set for it. If you're not monetizing content, generally 90% of the time, catalog does not appreciate. So if you're not utilizing it in any way, then you're kind of like losing money on the table. And then it goes back to understanding how much does your content cost to play out.
Sure.
Yeah, I think for us, the way I see the hidden cost, there's an internal cost and then there is an external cost, is what I would say. Internal cost could be, as mentioned, I mean, operations is a big cost, and it's not often about building the platform; it's about operating it and post launch. Where do you go, right? So operations and then maybe feature richness. You say, okay, I'm gonna be like Netflix, and then you're looking at, okay, I wanna do the best protection on the content out there, DRM, let's put that in. And then suddenly you realize, okay, that's per playback, and every license you're paying something out to the DRM provider. And then commissions. All of us, whoever has launched or has worked with customers knows about Apple and Google tax, 30%, 50%, notorious taxes. So that's, and then you cannot find really too much, your way out of that tax unless, you're saying, okay, now I'm going to do my onboarding on web, and then I'm going to ask users to come back and sign in, etc. So you end up making it, the workflow a bit complex for the end user. And then for the external, I would say customer retention. So it's easy to get people onboarded, but then there's a cost to it, right? So you're talking about what's my cost of customer acquisition, and then what's my cost to retain them, and that has a multifold impact because customer retention, you have to refresh your library, you have to refresh your apps, you have to target the users at the right time, etc. So it's these things that really bloat or end up bloating your costs at the end of the day.
And Lucas, infrastructure.
Yes, from infrastructure point of view, yeah. I mean, if we go back to what the guy said about, you're launching your platform, you're just starting out, your early stages, you're likely not going to have the in-house expertise, as Harry said, to do anything yourself or ask someone to do it, right? So you're probably going to jump into the cloud, right? So I think on those bases, it's very likely you're also going to use some form of a consultant, right? A white label OTT or a system integrator to help you build this out. So I think, there's a few important questions I think you should be asking them, just to avoid this issue of unpredictable bills, as we know they do happen, is to really find out, how what does their backend look like? At the high level, if we wanted to move tomorrow, how agnostic are you? Like, if you wanted to change how we encode or process the video, or how do we move our content storage, right? I think it's an important question to ask that gives you, that feeling of security, knowing that, you're not tied into something in particular should the cost spiral out. And also, what we see from an infrastructure layer, as you scale, your costs should actually start dropping down, right? So how does that plan out with the billing model of the consultants you're engaging with around that? I think there's crucial questions to ask. So unpredictability in terms of billing is only when you not ratify all those components and how they impact the overlaying margins, I'd say, from video delivery perspective.
Okay. I mean, that makes total sense. I mean, you guys brought up a lot of good points here about these sort of, again, costs that new services often underestimate. Actually, there's probably some established services that also underestimate costs. But Kyle, I want to play off of something that you talked a little bit about, which is you started to hint around, basically supporting devices as one of those, things that relate to complexity. So maybe you can start us off with an answer to this, but I want to get into, how do companies make a decision about which devices to support? And the reason I say this is, we know device fragmentation is no joke. I mean, it is a major challenge to support legacy devices and the scope of devices and all this stuff. So, in your opinion, how do companies make that decision?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think it really goes back down to what shape your catalog is in, right? If can it support monetization in the different device monetization rates? Like what I bring about that, for example, is you might have a native YouTube catalog from, like, say, a creator, and they're not segmented for TV ad uh, typical ad breaks. But then when you go on like a mobile player, you can just do DAI and then just interrupt it natively, and then that might allow you to monetize it a little bit better. What if you have a bunch of short form clip compilations at like 5 minutes each? Then you don't ever have to worry about DAI being a disruptive viewer experience. Then you can just throw it up on a fast service where there's natural end breaks where you can then slot your ads. But if you have, like, say, a movie that's barely TV formatted, it's not going to work on a on a mobile device, because you're gonna not monetize a 2 hour long form. Like, that's absurd. And then that means you have to spend money to digitize it or segment it so you can have the ad breaks. So it goes back to, like, do you know your viewer? What shape your catalog is in? Can it support the current monetization models that are in place at the moment? And then you take it from there.
Oh, that makes sense. Other thoughts? Got to be thoughts about this. This is a big decision nowadays.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's key for our customers and often comes up in the conversation, of course, is the target market. Because, for example, if you take Africa, right, and you'll find a lot of mobile devices which are low end, and people don't have the habit of downloading and installing the apps, right? And so in those kind of markets, then you would say, okay, I'm not gonna do native apps. Maybe PWA would work better for me. Right? So you have to really understand what works in a market. Then if you want to launch a Roku app, you have to work and if you're targeting, say, areas of Europe as the market where Roku is not really dominant player, maybe it's great in Americas, right? So you have to really understand the target market where you're launching so that you can make those decisions on the devices and the kind of apps that are gonna be used to deliver that experience. And of course, as Kyle mentioned, and we have been talking about the content type, microdramas, vertical format contents, you would not want to do on TVs. It's a not even web in a lot of cases, right? It's a mobile vertical format consumption mode, works really well with Gen Z and the newer generation, who are really glued to their mobile devices. So um, that's the kind of content. And then at the end of the day, it's also commissions. As I mentioned, there are businesses who are really really worried about the 30% or the 15% tax that they have to give, and they end up saying, okay, I have a really good distribution, people know me as a brand. I may never go on Apple and Google. People will come visit me on my on the website, maybe put this brand as a shortcut, again, use PWA and be, and start consuming there. So that's the kind of, thing that we get in our discussions.
Eris, any thoughts on that as well?
Well, I could try to add. I think the content type might be strongly connected to the screen type. Let's say if it is a small screen or a big screen, or mobile or not. While the kind of a device that it is on, like if it is Samsung or LG or Android TV, depends strongly on the penetration of those in a certain market. And then globally, of course, if you would like to be global, it is rather complex, let's say. But if you target US, then Roku is still very important. If you target, I don't know, some country in Europe, you will have to find out which devices are mostly present there, because lately there have been many smart TV devices. For example, mobile is, of course, there is Android, there is iOS, but smart TV is blooming with variety, and you would have to do your own research. I mean, of course, we advise always. We have some of these statistics. We know where to find them, to be able to tell if Samsung is 50% or LG is 20 or whatever. But that's the connection, I would say. It's a crossover between content type and actual physical presence in the markets that you're targeting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously security is a concern too, right? I mean, back to, sort of Kyle, what you had said about, what content are you serving? Well, if it's high premium value content, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to support a lot of the older legacy devices because they just won't be secure enough for the content's right holders. Okay, so Lucas, I want to turn towards you now and talk a little bit about something we've kind of discussed as a whole here, which is cloud versus on-prem versus a bit of both. And you kind of mentioned this in your first answer around, compute and transcode and what should we push off. So, like, giving advice to this new OTT service, what belongs in the cloud? Like, what doesn't? And then what makes more sense, using hybrid?
Okay. So let's imagine, you launch OTT platform, you've got a growing list of subscribers, you're 6 months, a year into your platform launch, and you're seeing success and growth, right? Now you're sitting there and thinking and strategizing, okay, so we're scaling, and now we want to look at our margins. How do we cut costs in order for us to continue scaling, right? Whether that's content acquisition, whether that's actually product development internally from an OTT platform perspective, or expansion to new geographies. So typically what we normally see, the focus starts at the video pipeline, right? So we start looking at encoding, transcoding, origin, packages, all that heavy lifting that happens to get that content ready to be delivered, right? So what, we see platforms go by two routes. I think the first and the most cost-effective route, which will require internal resource management, is invest into some beefy machines, get some capex investment out of the way, and deploy it somewhere on-prem or deploy it in a data center, right? Somewhere. That will require internal, know-how, how to manage it, how to, procure everything. But that will be the most cost-effective route that we know of at this point in time. Should you then, decide that actually we still want to focus more on growing subscriber lists, but actually, we love the elements of a cloud, but we don't want to look after it ourselves, then go out to the market and look for more traditional bare metal cloud vendors out there, because there are plenty of them. If you Google around, you're going to find loads of them. So you're kind of moving away from physical layer management. You're now looking at actual software layer management. So there are plenty of software vendors out there that can help you with the transcoding or encoding piece on top of that compute, or you can manage some of those products in-house. the more pieces of stuff you drag in house, the more cost effective it's going to be, right? I think a general rule of thumb is what we see. If you were fully into the hyperscale cloud, clicking buttons on different services to deliver that content, you're probably going to see a reduction in your overall TCO of around 50 to 60% if you did it on-prem over a course of I'd say 2, 3 years per period of time. If you move to more some of that middle mark, you're probably looking at 30 to 35%, right? And that depends on which pieces of media pipeline we look at. You might decide to call, let's actually take our content and do it in-house. Like let's move away from buckets. And that's another piece of cost optimization you can achieve. So you can tackle piece by piece, or you can do everything in-house. But I have to say that, hyperscalers should always still be there. You're still going to have a lot of unpredictable stuff happen throughout the day. So do not move away from those. So that'll be our take.
That makes sense. Okay, everybody else, what are your thoughts?
I think workflow is an important aspect for this kind of decisioning because and there are so many pieces of this puzzle of solving how do I stream end to end, right? So, for example, doing encoding, if you know that you're gonna get a steady content refresh, you could do that on-prem, and that works really well for you because you've done a capex investment. Okay, these are my encoders, and you have a reserve processing power always available to do that, right? Whereas shifting, looking at different piece of the puzzle, maybe subscriptions or analytics, there is no point of doing that on-prem. Cloud services are really good at doing that. Data management, analysis on top of the events that you get out of your streaming service. So those kind of things can be on cloud, and then you can go back if, let's say, you're doing a lot of AI is something that is coming up quite a lot now. Again, a good use case to invest on those bare metals to just make sure that you have capacity available and you're not paying cloud tax for those AI workloads or for those GPUs to work with. So yeah, I think workflows define how you look at this.
Paris, thoughts?
Yes, I would like to say that everything belongs in cloud and everything belongs on-prem to begin with.
You're going to confuse your young OTT startup.
Of course, it depends on a lot of reasons. It depends on, if you like CapEx, if you like OpEx, and it depends also on, for example, if you are already running your own data center, like telcos do, and then, of course, they want to have something in their data centers because many times they don't really know what to do with their data center and the capacity of already purchased hardware, which is on premises, and they would like to use it. So in those cases, for example, there is almost no discussion. I mean, it will suit them to do things on prem. Okay. Other times, you might be constrained by the signal that you're receiving that is local or is available only locally somewhere, like terrestrial or satellite, even different kinds of other inputs. But it may be only local. You have to do it on prem in the place where it is available. For the VOD, I would say that there are no constraints. You can do it anywhere. It depends on how you see, if you want to write it off for, for the next 5 years, or if you want operational cost. It's it's much more flexible. Let's say for linear channels, you might be constrained to do it on prem, which is what happens usually, and especially with telcos. Yes.
Kyle, anything to add last?
No, I think there's a lot of factors and decisions that help influence infrastructure, and that's why we're having this debate. And it can be very just because what we decide today might be best in practice, knowing that things change tomorrow and being able to be agile is something that we have to be mindful of, considering how standards like 2 years ago are now antiquated now. So I think one thing we're also trying to be better about is making sure we can adapt to ever-changing standards without being too trapped and encumbered with previous ones.
Not very good point. Yes, that does play a huge role in the decision process. Okay, so we're coming up on time here. We've got one question I want to get to, which is somebody had asked for us to define what a cloud service is. So I just, Lucas, can you just give us a quick definition about what a cloud service is?
So in our world, cloud service would be when you look up in the sky and you see various clouds up in the air delivering data and doing all the fancy stuff without you touching anything. So a cloud service on the very basic level, it's basically a piece of software that achieves a particular task, whether that's to prepare content for you, whether that's to store the content for you in some form of fashion, where you just click a button, right? So you don't touch it, you don't see it, you don't get involved in any way. You click a button and it's all done for you. So that's what we would classify a cloud service as, I'd say.
That might be one of the best definitions I've ever heard, actually. I like that. You just click a button. You don't have to do anything. It's all done for you. I like that. Okay, so the last question I want to get to here is really about you're wrapping up this conversation. You're done with this meeting with this new OTT service provider, and they've got all these things to think about now. Infrastructure decisions are going to affect my costs. Well, I got to remember my content, just all this stuff. But you don't want them to leave this meeting freaked out. So, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to this content owner who's trying to launch this platform? And what I want to do is I'm going to go down the row of where I see you guys sitting in my little boxes of participants. So we'll start with Lucas, and then we'll go with Rishab, and then Kyle, and then we'll end with Harris. But just take 60 seconds. Give me what your one piece of advice is you would give this fledgling startup streaming platform.
So I'm going to say something everyone else is probably going to say, which is content. I think that's the most important piece. It's having the right content and and approaching the right audience with that content. So I think that will really define, your rates of success, whether that's for fast, whether that's S4, whatever that is you want to achieve. I think it's all about the content to start with. So that'd be me.
That makes sense. Rashad.
I would say in big bold blocks, technology is sorted. Don't worry about technology. Too many vendors to take care of that piece. And as just building upon what Lucas said, content is one, but do focus on your audience as well. Target them, target the right audience with the right content at the right time is what helps you win. And that's it.
Oh, fantastic. I like that. That's yes. Sweet and simple. Kyle.
Yeah, these guys are content guys too. I love it. No, but in all seriousness, I think really what people need to be aware of is like be honest and run the numbers. Like once you know your content, once you know your audience, what is your appetite for risk and what is your runway, and be honest about that. And I think that would be the biggest thing I would caution people.
Harris.
Well, besides the content, let's say,
you're going to give a different piece of advice.
There is marketing, unless maybe the content already has sold itself somehow in advance. There is the marketing, which is typically not forgotten but underestimated, probably. And then regarding technology and the services, I would say there is the major advantage of choosing one reliable vendor who is flexible and who is able to provide an end-to-end solution and give the full accountability for the service. So if you're starting up, believe me, you don't want to work with 5 different vendors. And of course, this vendor who takes the whole thing technologically needs to be flexible in terms of being willing and able to replace parts of the system like CDN, like head end or transcoding farm or whatever it is, with different other kinds of solutions if you as a client would like to do that tomorrow. And that's the advice I would give. Yeah.
No, that's good. And that could be a whole discussion on a panel in and of itself, right? The whole idea of single vendor accountability and vendor lock-in. So that's great advice. So I just want to recap a little bit, just as we end here, this, we often say about OTT services that content is king, right? And it's about, I think we say that with the perspective of what is there for the viewer to watch. If there's more to watch, they'll come watch more things and be on the platform more often. But what you all have pointed out is that it's not just about the catalog of content you have, it's the type of content you have, which impacts your monetization methods, which impacts your technology decisions, which impacts what's in the cloud and what's out of the cloud. And I think that's a really important distinction that we need to make as an industry, is it's not just about what there is to watch, but it's about what there is to watch and how that affects the very streaming service I can even offer people. And so I think you guys brought that up, and it is really, really a salient point that we need to make more noise about. Content does drive these decisions you're going to make about your OTT service. Listen, this has been fantastic. It's great, talking with all of you about this. We could just keep going on. I have more questions we just didn't even get to. So I want to say thank you. It's been a really great webinar, and I will hand it back over to Jose.
Awesome. Thank you all for a tremendous and incredibly well-rounded conversation. Jason, as you mentioned, the group really touches on nearly every facet of the streaming business. You have servers.com taking care of the infrastructure. SVTA actively shapes the technical ecosystem. Fremantle, of course, brings the premium content, and Enview and More Screens connect the technology, platform, and audience experience. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Put them all together, and this group could essentially build you a pretty compelling and badass streaming service geared for your content from the ground up. So if anything you heard today resonated with you, we encourage you to get in touch with them to continue the conversation, and please feel free to reach out to the OTT.X team, and we're happy to facilitate. Today's session was recorded and will be made available for online viewing on demand in the next couple days. Thank you again to Jason, Lucas, Kyle, and Rashab for sharing your expertise, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope to see you at another OTT.X program soon, and that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all so much. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you so
for
much.
now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.